This podcast is for educational purposes only. The views expressed by both guests and hosts are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply endorsement by the University of Delaware or UD Cooperative Extension.
Welcome to Extension 302. We are the partners in crime. My name is Blake Moore. I am the Natural Resources and Horticulture Agent based out of Kent County.
Hey, I'm Dan Severson. I am located in Newark, Delaware. I am Newcastle County Ag Agent. I have statewide responsibilities for dairy and small ruminants.
So I'm Jake Jones, the Kent County Ag Agent at the University of Delaware at the Parody Center. I have responsibilities within Kent County. They keep me locked in there.
And I'm Katie Young, Digital Media Specialist with UD Cooperative Extension, based in Kent County, Delaware. We have 3 fantastic guests here to answer your questions, so let's dive right in.
It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Gavin Killer from the University of Delaware in the Department of Animal and Food Science. He is a professor of molecular virology. I met Dr. Killer back in 1990. Thank God he doesn't remember any of that. We became colleagues in 2002 when I started working for the University of Delaware, and we continue through today. He has a vast dynamic background in virology. And actually, Dr. Killer, I didn't know that you actually did a stint at E.I. DuPont and the Moores and Company in Wilmington. So the focus of this podcast today is to talk about viruses and specifically COVID-19. So for our listeners out there, what exactly is a virus?
Okay, thanks, Dan, for the introduction. So a virus, it's a very small particle. I mean, you can see a fungus, when it makes a spore and a mycelia. You can see bacteria under a light microscope, or even just in pond water. You can see little amoeba and things like that. But viruses are really, really small. You need an electron microscope in order to see them. And they're little intracellular parasites. They don't move, they don't grow, but what they do is they attach to and enter other cells, and they hijack them. And they take over a cell's normal functions of making energy and making proteins, and they take them over for their own purpose. And so viruses don't end up dividing like bacteria. They end up replicating. They're like Legos. So you get a cell that's full of Lego parts, and then they assemble inside a cell into lots of new virus particles, and then those virus particles are released into the environment to infect other cells. So they're not cells. They're not classically defined as being living, but they are these little molecular, essentially, machines that take over eukaryotic cells. And there are viruses that infect bacteria, viruses that infect plants, viruses that infect animals, animal viruses. And the coronaviruses like COVID-19 is an example of one of these animal viruses.
Cool. Putting off of that, what is a coronavirus, and specifically, what is COVID-19?
So a coronavirus, viruses are tough to characterize because they come in all different shapes, all different sizes, all different structures. The only constant is that they're all tiny. And a coronavirus gets its name because if you look at it at the atomic level at electron microscope, it's like a sphere, a little sphere or ball. And that ball is studded with these little spikes. And so if you look at a picture of it, and there have been pictures from the CDC and everything, it looks like a crown. It looks like the spikes on a crown. That's how we got the word coronavirus. And this virus, our cells, human cells, your dog cells, are all, the genetic material is DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. Coronaviruses are a class of organism, a virus, where the genetic material is RNA, ribonucleic acid. So it's a different type of genetic material than we have in our cells. And that spike protein, those crowns on the spikes on this virus, those spikes are proteins, and they're called spike proteins, the S, and they're really important for the biology of these viruses. Now, I mentioned how viruses have to attach and they enter into cells in order to take them over. And this protein, these crowns, these on this virus, are the proteins that do the attachment. But at the same time, since they're on the surface of the virus, when this virus is in like an animal, like a human, these are the proteins that humans and other animals recognize and then mount an immune response to. So they're important in the host recognizing and trying to mount a defense against these viruses. So that's that major structural protein on the surface that makes it distinctive structure and also really important for its biology.
Dr. Keeler, coronavirus, this is a novel coronavirus, right? So can you tell us how it emerged and how it evolved and was able to spread all over the world like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are lots of coronaviruses. There are many, probably hundreds of different coronaviruses around. And actually, a third of the colds that people get in the wintertime are actually caused by coronaviruses, but obviously not this virus or its relatives. So there are coronaviruses all over the place. There are coronaviruses that infect animals as well. So infectious bronchitis virus is a very common coronavirus that infects chickens. This virus apparently originated in bats, and then it was somehow had been able to transmit it to an animal intermediate, perhaps a pangolin, which is kind of like a armadillo type looking creature, and then from there it went into humans. It specifically went into a fish worker, we believe, in a live animal market in Wuhan, China. And that's where it first started. And actually think about what I just described. So it started in an animal, and then went to a second animal, and then went to a human. That was the first human this virus had ever been in. And so that's what really causes the problem. So we have a person who's now infected with the virus, and this is a new virus, never been in humans before. And so, everybody gets vaccinated for chickenpox, and so that virus is around. People are protected against chickenpox. People get vaccinated every year for influenza virus, even though influenza causes a lot of disease. There's a lot of people that are vaccinated, a lot of people that have been infected with influenza virus before, and so they've now immune to that virus. But now here's a person in Wuhan, China, who's gotten this brand new virus that nobody has ever seen before. And so when that virus, as I described, replicates in his cells and then gets released, and then he coughs it out or contaminates a piece of machinery, and another person gets exposed to it, that person's never seen that virus before either. And so now you have a spread of this virus in a localized population in China. Nobody's ever seen this. Everybody is amenable to being infected by this virus. Humans have never been exposed to it. There's no natural immunity. There's no pool of people that have been immunized that are protected. Everybody is susceptible. And then, so it gets in one city in China. And then because we have such a mobile society now, as people move and visit friends and relatives, or by air travel, go to different countries, then that virus spreads to other countries that have never seen this virus before. And so that's really the issue. We have a new, essentially, organism that's now sort of spreading across the world, and people that are completely susceptible are now being exposed to it. And that's sort of how this virus has emerged and how it's spread across the global population. So it's not the fact that it's an RNA virus or a DNA virus. That's really kind of irrelevant. Okay. The fact is that humanity was naive to this virus. Humans had never been exposed to this pathogen, to this agent before. And so nobody was immune to it. Nobody had ever been exposed to it. And so everybody currently that gets exposed to it gets infected by it, and the virus infects people in different ways, and that's why you get different levels of susceptibility and different disease. And then each person then becomes potentially that's infected becomes potentially a little living incubator that can then spread the virus to other naive people. So so that's what makes it such a threat. That it's never been seen before, this particular virus. It's evolved separately. So you can give it whatever name you want. It could be a different type of genetic material, but this virus is unique to this place and time in our history. And humanity now has to essentially respond to that biologically, and we try and help it along by, perhaps by developing vaccines or treatments. But the world's going to now be exposed to this virus and is going to respond to it. And so that eventually maybe this virus goes away like other viruses, maybe it stays around, but if it stays around, the population of the world now in the future will have seen this virus. And so people will be immune. There'll be treatments for it. And so it won't be as bad in the future. And that's what we talk about, this spike of infectivity. People have seen it going around the world, first in China, and then in Italy, and then in Spain, and now in the United States. And so this virus is now progressing in different parts of the world, and being new naive populations of animals, humans in this case, are being exposed to it and responding to it.
Thank you.
So can you give us examples of other diseases, other coronaviruses that are related to COVID-19?
I can a little bit. So as we were talking about, this is an example of a zoonotic virus. So that's a virus that started out in animals and then ended up in humans. And so it's essentially a virus that has essentially jumped the species barrier, right? So it can go from animals to humans. So Ebola is another example of a virus that, it's not a coronavirus, but it's an example of another virus that essentially started in bats and then goes into monkeys and other primates, and then can go into humans. So that's another example of a zoonotic disease. But there are lots of viruses that aren't zoonotic, so you don't think that all animal viruses do that. So there are lots of viruses that aren't zoonotic. For instance, we mentioned infectious bronchitis virus before, which is a coronavirus that infects chickens. That's not a zoonotic virus. That virus doesn't infect humans, but it's been around in chickens for a long, long time. But the COVID-19 virus, its closest relatives are two viruses that are also zoonotic. The first one was the SARS virus, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, that actually also started in Southeast Asia, in China. And that's also a coronavirus, the same class of virus family, this beta coronavirus. And it came also from bats. And then it apparently went into civet cats. And then from there went from cats into humans. And so that's one example. And then there's another virus that people may have heard of, is MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which is another coronavirus, same sort of family as the COVID-19 virus. Initially started out in bats, and that virus then went to camels, and then from camels infected humans. So these zoonotic viruses are interesting to sometimes follow how they evolved and how they developed. They can go through different animal species. We're still not exactly sure where COVID-19 came from, but it did come from a live animal market. And so the assumption is one of those animals from that market was the carrier that infected that first worker.
What has to happen with the virus to make that jump? How does it evolve in order to do that?
That's a really good question. And there are a lot of groups around the world that are essentially they've sequenced now, hundreds, if not thousands, of different isolates of this virus, and to try and track back and see where it developed. And so that's how we know it came initially from bats, because if you sequence that all the nucleotides are in this virus's genome, it's most closely related to a coronavirus that had already been found in bats. And so probably what happened in this case, people haven't done the biology yet to confirm it, is that while it's replicating and while it's growing and while it's assembling new virus particles, mistakes happen while its genome is being replicated, and so it gets these random mutations occasionally. And so at some point there was a set of mutations that changed the structure of this virus so that now it could not only infect this animal cells, but it could actually attach to and infect human cells. So we don't know exactly what those changes are, but there are changes at the genetic level that somehow changed the conformation, probably of this spike, this S protein, that allowed it to infect a different range of cell types, and then that will happen to be in humans. And it's a continuing process as this virus evolves and goes around the world. People can have followed mutations that are happening in this virus as it progresses through time.
So how can this virus be monitored and controlled? And we've talked about a vaccine and then the immunity coming to the population, but those are only two options, and they both are going to take quite a bit of time, correct?
That's correct. So monitoring. So what has been done so far? What people have been monitoring is actually the presence of the virus's genetic material, and so that's what these tests are involved with. People take swabs. You take a swab from a cheek or nasal swab from an individual, and you isolate all the nucleic acid that's in there, and then test it to see, is there any genetic material from COVID-19 in this swab? And that can be a fairly rapid test. One of the bottlenecks is not just the test itself, but also the equipment and the reagents in order to conduct the test. So there are a couple levels of needs for laboratories in order to conduct these tests. And that's a good test, but that only gives you part of the story. It tells you whether a person has the virus in them in that particular time. But if you got a cold or something like that, and you tested yourself during this test a month or so later, you wouldn't detect the virus anymore. And so you don't know during this test whether somebody was infected a month ago, but they've already been cured and the virus is gone. All you're looking for is the material from the virus. So there's another test. There are antibody-based tests or antigen-based tests that are going to need to be developed. And they're starting to be developed. They take a little longer to develop, to look and see, okay, not only is a person actively infected with this virus, and so we can determine who's infected, but later on you can go back and say, okay, looking back at the population, how many people were exposed to this virus? Because if you were exposed to this virus and you mounted an immune response, a lot of the times the immune response to pathogens and diseases is antibodies, and they last a long time, unlike the virus. So antibodies can last in the body for a long period of time. So you can retroactively look at a person and say, did this person mount an immune response to this virus? And if that person did, say, that person at one point in their past was exposed to this virus. And another thing you can do is have quicker tests than these genetic tests that will actually look for viral proteins. So this first generation tests, these tests for genetic materials are really good, but there are going to be further developments of different types of tests that will give us different types of information that'll be beneficial in truly determining who has been exposed and when they had been exposed. And that's one of the reasons why look at epidemiologists and scientists, and they say, well, if you look at the mortality of this virus as being a couple of %, saying eventually when we have this information, we'll find that mortality is much less than that. because we'll find a lot of people that were exposed to the virus, but perhaps didn't show any symptoms or very mild symptoms. And so they were never tested for the virus itself, but we can find out later they had been exposed. And, it's important to realize that, they're still saying over 80% of the people that get exposed to this virus either have no symptoms or very mild symptoms. And that the symptoms of this disease are really different from the flu. I mean, there's no real sore throat or runny nose or congestion. If you have those symptoms, you're really having a cold or some other respiratory disease. It's this fever and this dry cough and this muscle pains that are the primary symptoms of this disease. So that's the monitoring aspects. We can detect the genome of the virus, the genetic material, and we're coming up with tests to say, okay, now we can detect for the virus. Now let's check and see how the human is responding to the virus. And the vaccines and treatments is another, the whole area of really, really active study, and a lot of efforts are underway. There are clinical trials already going on for 3 or 4 different therapeutics and vaccines that I know of, and probably more than that. And vaccines, like anything else, there are many ways to approach it, right? So there are some vaccines that help the immune system, right? So a vaccine might be a protein from this virus that you could give to a person so that it's just one protein, so the person doesn't get sick, but it can mount an immune response to that protein. And then when that person gets exposed to the virus, it's got already the immunological memory there that it can fight off the infection. There are treatments that go after proteins that are made by this virus. So this virus has a complex, you might imagine, it's a complex way it's assembled and created. And so you can throw a monkey wrench into that process and mess up the process for how it makes new viruses. So that's another way to help develop a vaccine or a treatment. And then there are also other treatments that work to help enhance the immune response, so that they're not like directed against the virus itself, but they're to aid the human immune system in responding to the virus. Or they're actually involved in damping down the bad reactions from the immune system. A lot of the very critical patients we see with COVID-19 are people whose immune response, and by here we're talking about their innate immune responses, these rapid things, we get a blister, you get reddening and swelling and fever. That's all part of the immune response. And some people, because of their previous medical conditions, overreact. And so that response is too robust. And so some treatments are trying to lessen that response so that the immune response isn't too strong against the virus. So there are lots of different approaches that people and researchers and physicians and scientists are approaching. They've all shown success in different models and different diseases. And so it's a matter of approaching this on many different areas, different prongs, some of which will be complementary, some of which will be used in tandem with each other to eventually control this. I'm sure that at some point this will be, in the near future, we'll have good treatments and vaccines against this disease.
My question is, what's the deal with bats?
What's the deal with bats? Yeah. That's a really good question, because bats seem to be the ultimate source of a lot of things. And I had somebody say to me, so why don't we just get rid of all the bats? And I said, well, you don't want to get rid of all the bats. Bats play a really important role in the ecology of nature, in controlling insects and in pollination. And so you can't do that. But, bats have a really interesting life cycle where they hibernate. And essentially, they've developed a very unique, their immune system is different than humans or dogs or anything like that. And so they've developed an immune system that appears to let some viruses, how should I say this? Essentially lets them replicate in their cells, but not actively end up destroying those cells. And so they end up being a reservoir for many different types of viruses, and it's how the viruses interact with the immune systems of bats.
I've been seeing a lot of bat implications, but a lot of people saying that it came from someone eating a bat, and so I think it was very useful to see that it's more complicated than that, and a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily true.
It's like a little knowledge is a dangerous thing,
Right.
and so it's really tough, and we all are so desperate to get knowledge that everybody takes this little piece of information to get from here and there, and everybody's just trying to make the best sense of it they can, and so it makes it tough.
Do you have any advice or misinformation that's out there? I listened to you talk on the town hall meeting, and sales of Corona beer have dropped, and this and that. How can we curb that kind of mentality?
I think the way to curb it is essentially to try and self-filter the news you get and what you're listening to, because it really comes down to, I think my advice is, it really ends up being practicing good biosecurity. And people in the agriculture industry know what biosecurity is, right? And the poultry industry, and keeping your houses, poultry houses, clean, and watching who comes in, making sure they have good wear gloves and clothing, and boots, and it's the same principles. Only instead of your farm animal, you need to practice it on yourself. Don't make it too complicated. Wash your hands, disinfection, surfaces, and social distancing are what's going to make this situation less bad than it could be. Many people are going to be infected. Many people are going to get sick. I agree with the experts I've read that we're still on an increase here. More people are going to get sick. There's going to be more disease. It's going to get worse and it gets better. But take care of yourself, and follow the governor's directives regard to travel and social gatherings, and hunker down, and this will pass.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, Dan and Jacob Blake, and good luck. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch.
Dr. Gordon Johnson, Extension Fruit and Vegetable Specialist at the University of Delaware, Carvel Research and Education Center in Georgetown, Delaware. Dr. Johnson is an assistant professor in the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences at UD and is the Produce Safety Alliance lead trainer, which makes him responsible for educating and preparing growers for the Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. Thanks for talking with us, Gordon.
You're welcome.
The first question we have is, can coronavirus be spread through the food system?
Well, that's an interesting question. The current science and our FDA guidelines state that the virus is not transmitted via food. So people should not be trying to avoid fresh fruit and produce, for example, because it is a respiratory virus, and you would have to pick the virus up, transmit if it had any virus on it, the food or the packaging, and then touch your nose or mouth, like your mouth or nose, and that's a very low probability that, number one, there would be virus on the food, and number two, that you would actually transmit it to infect yourself.
Okay, so if you eat the virus, would you get infected, or it has to be through those respiratory?
It's not like our foodborne illness viruses, like you would have a norovirus, for example, where it is a gastro virus. This one is a respiratory. It enters most commonly. It enters through the nose.
Okay.
Oh, so Dr. Johnson, we should still wash our fruit and vegetables just to make sure, even if it's not COVID-19, but we should always still wash our fruit and vegetables.
Yes, it's a good practice for food safety. Remove any dust, residue, waxes, whatever that has been put on the produce for display. And it's a good food safety practice. because we're mostly concerned with bacteria that cause foodborne illness, such as Salmonella, E. coli. And the best way to protect against that, getting any foodborne illness in a fresh fruit or vegetable that you're going to eat raw, is to wash it with cold tap water. If you have a soft brush, you can use that. No produce, no need to use soaps or any of those special produce washes. Just rinsing it and with cold water and soft brush.
Thank you. As we know, any kind of production of fresh produce is very labor intensive. So are you hearing about there being any issues with H2A workers and availability of them?
Yeah, I've talked to one of our largest growers. Currently, what is the government position is that if they H2A workers had worked in the U.S. previously, they would be allowed back in. What is the issue is any new workers that have to go through an interview process, and that's still being worked out. The thought is that we might be down about 20 to 30% on our labor force for the year. That, however, is a little bit up in the air. My recent reading is that they're still having some issues getting into the country. But hopefully by our time our produce is being harvested, that'll be solved.
Thank you.
Does the Food Safety Modernization Act have any rules to prevent outbreaks of contagious diseases like this, or is it mainly just those foodborne illnesses?
It's to protect against foodborne illnesses as well as worker safety of the employees in the food system. So I just read some guidance from the FDA for those folks for folks in the food industry, and the main concern is if they're to keep employees, any employees with symptoms from as with any business, is to send them home and then determine whether or not there's been any other infections in the workforce. That's more from a workforce safety standpoint, not from a product safety standpoint. They said there was no need to, other than normal disinfecting procedures, no need to do any disinfecting of the products themselves, any additional that they, above what they're currently doing. Now, the facilities themselves, so that you have employee transmission to employee transmission, they should be sanitized as per FDA guidelines, CDC guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
So we're getting to the point now, it's planting season, and we're going to have a lot of people planning for their fresh markets, farmers markets, U-Picks and stuff like that. How should these producers prepare for this, especially, if you're going to farmers markets or you have people coming to your farm?
Well, there's actually two questions there. I'll address, the planning part. What all farmers across the U.S. are being encouraged to do is to continue with what would be their normal practices, particularly fruit and vegetable growers, to assume that you're going to have the same demand and to plan accordingly. There are going to be some issues with direct marketers to try to distance. So how that they can do that has to be thought through. The main thing is, particularly when you're selling inside a facility, is that keeping people within that 6-foot distance. Current science shows that it's mostly droplet transmitted. There's science is still unsettled whether or not there's any aerial transmission, but the vast majority of cases, as far as the World Health Organization has, I heard an interview from them yesterday, is droplet transmitted. So that 6-foot, 2-meter guideline is, and how to do that in a direct marketing standpoint needs to be worked out by each grower. So that would be the main issue. Surfaces are important, but not nearly as important as the distance between and how you handle the produce, getting the produce to the consumer.
So it's normal work for farmers right now. They got to continue to keep going.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm a small scale producer myself, and I'm assuming that I'm going to not have a disturbed sales season. Within the industry itself, there's some shifts that have had to be made. As you know, most Americans ate out a lot, and now they're not. And as we get in, if these stay-in-place orders, if they persist longer into the sales season, then how you get the produce to the consumer is going to change, since they don't eat out. So you're not supplying restaurants. So a lot of our wholesale distributors now are getting into the home delivery business for the next couple of months. So there's a lot of changes in the food system to convert from sales to retail food establishments to going into supermarkets and selling to the public.
I know it's kind of early, but have you seen a shift in different new crops that are being planted due to this?
No, it's pretty much business as usual. The food is an essential part of our food is an essential item, and so it's not going to be affected directly. Indirectly, sure, there's going to be different things that affect whether or not people are going to go. Well, let's look at a watermelon, for example. Why do people buy watermelons? Well, they're going to have a picnic on the, take it to the beach. Well, they may not be able to do that. Is that going to affect sales? Don't know.
Good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's the end of our questions, but do you have anything else to add about, what you can kind of suggest to some of your growers out there, about how they can kind of plan for the future, or just kind of, what to expect coming up, and just kind of like staying relaxed and staying in their lane and getting ready to just do business as usual, as you said, just kind of what's your message to them?
Well, I would say, as with everybody that is deemed essential in the food system, is play your role. You are one of the heroes, so to speak, because you are providing food for our nation, and just continue to do your best. Expect some unexpected, but you're essential to our whole nation. So that's what I would say.
We have Secretary Michael Scuse with us. He's the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Delaware, and he leads the Delaware Department of Agriculture. In 2017, Michael T. Scuse was reappointed by Governor John C. Carney as Delaware's Secretary of Agriculture. Secretary Scuse previously served with the U.S. Department of Ag as Acting U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Acting Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, and Undersecretary for Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services. As Undersecretary, he oversaw USDA's Farm Service Agency, Risk Management Agency, and Foreign Agricultural Services. He served as Delaware's Secretary of Agriculture from 2001 to 2008, and also served as Chief of Staff to the former Governor Ruth Ann Minner. Secretary Scuse and his wife Patrice live in Smyrna on a corn, soybean, and wheat farm. Again, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Blake. And now that you've read that, people all across the country know that I can't hold a job. So thank you.
You are welcome. You are most welcome. Okay, so this morning we wanted to talk to you about, we have a special episode of our podcast. It's called Extension302. And we wanted to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting Delaware agriculture. Can you give us a little insight on that, of how it's affecting agriculture in Delaware?
Blake, it's affecting many different segments of agriculture, probably none more so than right now our poultry industry, because of the numbers of workers that we have in the plants and the extra precautions that they're having to take now to protect those workers, to make sure that they've got an adequate staff for the operation of those plants. So, I mean, they're doing extra cleaning, sanitizing, what they're doing in the break rooms. They've taken and removed tables so that they can practice the social distancing in the common areas. I know in the bathrooms, which you would have, mostly clean once or twice a day, those now are being sanitized several times a day. What the companies now this week have started to do, they've started to take the temperatures and ask questions of the staff and their workforce before they actually go into the plants. So there's an awful lot of additional requirements and safety precautions that have been put in place by the poultry industry. And it's a critical industry, quite frankly, that we have to keep in operation. If you look at the demands for meat products, and especially poultry products right now across the United States, these plants are critical to helping us feed our consumers, not just here in Delaware, but in the Northeast, but across the whole country. So those are extra precautions that they've taken place. We have an issue now with getting an adequate supply of H2A workers here in the United States. We have quite a few of our businesses here in Delaware that require H2A workers. And there's a great deal of concern that should this situation continue for weeks or months, that we won't have an adequate supply of H2A workers. Now, having said that, I know that the United States Department of Agriculture has been working very closely with the State Department to look at ways that they can streamline that process, get workers that have been in the country before, get them in here, and then look at ways that maybe we can get some new workers into that H2A program, which is the problem right now, because we don't have the ability to do those in-person interviews in Mexico and in some of the other countries because of lack of staff, and because current staff, in fact, are taking precautions against the coronavirus. So that's an issue for our fruit and vegetable farmers in the state, and a great deal of concern with them about having the ability to get an adequate workforce in the state. So precautions are chemical and fertilizer companies are taking the additional precautions. Right now, we've got requirements in place about keeping people from other states out of the state of Delaware. So we've been answering questions for those that are in the agricultural industry, but it is deemed the agricultural industry, for the most part, is deemed critical by the federal government as well as by our state government. So we're answering those questions right now because there's concerns about them and their workforce as well.
Roger that. Thank you. Thank you. And what about is foreign demand or any of that affected by this? And is it affecting what the bottom line of the Delaware farmer?
Well, it certainly is. When you look at the grain prices have gone down, the dairy prices also have gone down during this time. The foreign demand is decreasing, and because of that, we're seeing our pricing go down for the products that our producers normally would be receiving. Our grain prices again are dropping because of demand. The dairy prices have been dropping. There was relief. We did see some price increases for the dairy sector that at least got them to a break-even point because of the 4-year low that they've been having. But now that price has gone down again below their break-even production cost. And again, I think a lot of it is due to the lack of foreign demand for our products. And it's not just the lack of foreign demand, but we're having the issue of shipping products to other countries from our ports and receiving products from other countries because of port facilities in other countries. China is just now getting back to some point of normalcy at some of their port facilities. There was a major issue in getting containers unloaded in China and then reloaded to ship products back to the United States and other countries. So the virus is definitely having an impact on trade, not just here in the United States, but worldwide.
Awesome. Thank you.
Secretary Scuse, Dan Severson. Before I get into how great DDA is and how they've been supporting our ag industry, can you just give some of our listeners that do not really understand what H2A means as far as employees?
Well, thank you. H2A is a federal program where we get guest workers in from other countries. And there's a whole process that they have to go through in order to be eligible to enter into the United States. But it's a way for those in the agricultural industry to make sure that they have an adequate workforce, either for planting or for harvesting crops or dealing with other agricultural issues. So the H2A program is one that is federally set up to help our producers make sure that they have an adequate workforce for their businesses.
That's one of the best definitions I've heard as far as that program goes. And when you were talking, dairy industry is very dear to my heart. And when you were talking about Class 3, basically futures have dropped $5 in I don't know how many weeks. And like you were saying, and so it goes back to it's different from the days when you farm, your parents farmed. This is not a local economy anymore. It is a international economy that our farmers need to be aware of and pay attention to. Correct?
No, you're definitely correct. It's a global economy, and pretty much all of our ag sectors now it rely on a world market for pricing. I know a few years ago we were exporting up to 17% of our dairy products, and with that you saw an increase in pricing. And then when the market became flooded because of issues with China devaluing their currency, the European Union taking their quotas off, milk prices here at that time were at a record high. So we had a record production, and you add those three things together, and that's basically why you've seen such a large collapse for an extended period of time for milk pricing here in the United States. And again, we were just getting back to where our dairy farmers were at a break-even price, and now fortunately with the decline, they're back to losing money again. And it's unfortunate. I know last year here in Delaware, we lost, I believe, 5 of our dairies. We're not a large dairy state, but the industry is still important to us and to our consumers. We lost about 5 of our producers, and we lost our number 2 and number 3 producer here in the state of Delaware. So, and again, it all goes back to pricing and making money. And there's a point in time where, unfortunately, our dairy producers are having to say enough is enough and cutting their losses. And when you look at the losses of dairy farms across the entire United States, it is very troubling, because these are family farming operations that have been in the family for generations, and in many cases are multi-generational, where you have a father, a son and daughter, a grandson and granddaughter on these farms, and they're getting out, and that's a huge loss to communities, not just here in Delaware, but across the whole country.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as of yesterday, on my count, we're less than 20 dairy farms in the state of Delaware. However, we're looking at we have 4 creameries in the state making ice cream. So, we're small but mighty. So we got to give kudos to them reaching and finding a niche market and trying to sustain what they're doing.
Now that's a good point, and I tell you what, those dairies that have their own creameries where they're making ice cream. Look, I've sampled ice cream from each and every one of them, and you're not going to get any better ice cream at any store or anywhere in the country than these on-farm creameries are providing to not just our citizens, but to those regionally. So, and I'm a sucker for good ice cream, and it's some of the best.
Yeah, everybody always says, well, who makes the best ice cream? I said, whoever gave it to me last.
That would be a very good answer. That's my answer from now on.
So I want to get back to, I get off topic. So Blake's our focus guy. He keeps me on track. But
believe that if you will.
So So what currently are in the books, or what are you doing, or what have you been doing to help continue the support of our ag community during this COVID-19 outbreak?
Well, there's several things. I mean, when you look at the relief package, the $2 trillion relief package that was passed and signed by the president last week, there's considerable amount of monies in there for agriculture. It gives the Department of Agriculture funding to replenish the Commodity Credit Corporation, which is where they pay a lot of their program funds out of for the different agricultural programs. There's money in there for specialty crops. There's a letter that's being circulated right now in the Northeast about providing some of that funding for our dairy farms across the Northeast. Our National Association of State Departments of Agriculture is going to be very involved in making recommendations on how that additional funding coming to USDA should in fact be spent. I think we're all going to push for a third round of the market facilitation program because our grain producers especially have not gotten the relief that everyone anticipated with the signing of the trade agreement with China. So we're going to be pushing for another round of that program as well, and look for ways that we can make sure that the funding that's coming out of that $2 trillion is enough of it's going to make its way to agriculture to make a difference. Here on the home front, we're working with our agricultural community to make sure that those businesses that have been deemed essential are going to continue to operate as effectively and efficiently as possible, but still within the guidelines that the federal government and Governor Carney have set down, especially when it comes to social distancing. That's something that I don't think people are taking as seriously as they should be. We're seeing our numbers increase here in Delaware, not anywhere near like our neighboring states, fortunately for us. And hopefully we won't see our numbers rise to the point where our neighboring states have currently. So we're working with those producers in the agricultural industry again to make sure that they're practicing all the good policies and procedures that need to be in place to protect their workers as well as the citizens here in the state of Delaware.
Correct. So talking about social distancing and rolling out programs, one of the reasons me, Jake, and Blake, and Katie decided to do a podcast is as an extension, we have to alter how we roll out our programs and reach our producers. How's DDA handling reaching out to their clientele and making sure that everybody's on this, getting reached?
Well, we still have our inspectors in the field, but they're taking as many precautions as they possibly can. If we have complaints from nutrient management, we're dealing with those as best we can. The same with the pesticides. One of the things that, and we weren't thinking about it until we actually had to postpone or cancel the test for the pesticides applicators. We had 80 people that were supposed to be tested last week that desperately needed a license in order to work or to run their business. So we're looking at being creative. We're looking at maybe being able to do the testing in the parking lot, everyone remaining in their vehicles, and that way we can get those that really need to have that license, get them licensed without exposing them or our staff. And so that's one way we're looking at being creative to help the agriculture sector can continue to move on. And again, we've got different weights and measures inspectors, but we've pulled them out of the supermarkets where we know we have a lot of people, a lot of the public going into, looking out for their safety as well as the safety for the public. So we've given them other assignments that are less risky, where they're not going to be dealing with large numbers of public. Answering calls from all of the farmers. Call yesterday from a producer who needs to start planting within the next couple of days a vegetable crop, answering questions that they have about their ability to continue to operate and function. Fertilize companies. We may end up to the point where we're going to have to issue letters on the department letterhead stating that drivers or workers are actually critical and have the ability to cross state lines or to be on the highway. So we're preparing for that if in case it does come to that. Now, hopefully businesses will be able to provide their staff with a letter on their own letterhead stating that their business has been deemed critical, and hopefully we hope that that'll be accepted by the authorities. If not, then we're here and prepared to issue letters with on department letterhead stating that these businesses are critical. So, and I think everyone has to realize that this situation is changing, if not daily, but hourly. So we need to make sure that we have the proper workforce here at the department to deal with those changes as they come along, so that we can relay any changes that need to be relayed to different sectors of the agricultural industry.
Yeah, like you said, this is an evolving thing, and changes are going to be expected and challenges are going to be there that we're just going to have to deal with. On a lighter side, I think we should reopen the drive-in movie theater there in Felton, and then we can do our pesticide certification there.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate those drive-in movie theaters went by the wayside, because we could certainly use some of them now with the social distancing and people getting, like myself, bored when you go home in the evening or on the weekend. So, that would be a good idea. But unfortunately, we've lost all of those drive-ins. And I don't know that the younger generation would even know what a drive-in movie theater is.
No, I talked to Jake yesterday. He had no idea what we were talking about.
That's what I figured.
Well, that leads into the next question of what resources, federal and state, are available to assist farmers who may face challenges during this time?
Well, again, we're here at the Department of Agriculture, and we're trying to do business as best we can during this situation. I know that our federal offices, although they may not be staffed, you still have the ability to contact our local Farm Service Agency office, the Rural Development Office, and our local NRCS office. They're still taking calls. And I know that USDA is working on now how to distribute the funding that came out of the relief package that was passed passed last week. Time keeps running and you lose track of time when you're in these situations. But farmers that have questions, we're here to answer them. And I know that our federal partners are there to answer questions from the agricultural community. We would like for agriculture to run as near normal as it possibly can. We're getting into a critical time now. Again, with some of our crops being planted, started in the next few days. And you're going to look at the grain planting of corn crops being done probably within the next couple of weeks if the weather turns around and straightens out. We stop getting all the rain and it warms up. But it's a critical time right now. We still have producers that have grain in the tanks that need to be moved, and our poultry industry needs to continue operating. So, but we'd like to get the ag sector is running near normal as it possibly can be.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. A lot of great information for the agricultural community and the community as a whole. So to wrap things up, what is your message to Delaware farmers who may be anxious about challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, a couple things. Number one, first and foremost, I think they need to understand that, if we continue to work together and we take the proper precautions, that eventually and hopefully sooner rather than later, we're going to be able to get through this very difficult time. and as I pointed out, we need the agricultural sector to continue to operate as near normal as they possibly can. We have the greatest producers to be found anywhere in the world right here in the United States. And I've repeatedly said that some of our best producers in the United States are located right here on the Delmarva Peninsula. So we have consumers out there that are going to rely on and count on our agricultural producers to keep those store shelves fully stocked. So we need them to continue to operate as best they can. We're here to help, and I know that our federal partners are here to help as well. But make no mistake about it, we're going to get through this, and we're going to come out on the other side, and we'll be stronger and better than ever before. So just do the best job that you can, and if you need the help, give us a call.
Thank you for joining us for the inaugural episode of Extension 302. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and will come back for more. In the meantime, please subscribe, visit us online at udel.edu/extension, and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at UD Extension. If you have a comment, topic suggestion, or question, email us at extension302@gmail.com. This program is brought to you by the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, a service of the UD College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, a land-grant institution. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.